Good morning. I'll call to order this meeting of the Elections and Rules Committee. The date is December 7th, 2016. My name is Jacob Fry. I'm the chair of this committee, and today I'm joined by my colleagues, council members Gordon, Cano, Reich, Quincy, Warsami, and Johnson. We are a quorum of this committee. Colleagues, we have one item on the agenda for this morning, which is an amendment to a series of amendments to our regular rules that we deal with in council meetings. Here to present is our city clerk, Casey Carl. Mr. Carl.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Casey Carl. I have the privilege of serving as city clerk. And as the chair indicated, I'm here this morning to summarize some proposed revisions to the council's rules of order. As provided in the city charter, the council is the governing body of the municipal government, and all legislative and policymaking authority is vested in the council, except such powers as are specifically assigned to another officer or a board. And in order to conduct the business of the city in an orderly manner, the council is explicitly empowered to adopt rules to govern its own proceedings. And this is set forth in section 4.4 of the city charter. The current rules were developed and have evolved over many years since the municipal corporation was incorporated. In 2013, a complete revision of the entire rules was completed, which then was adopted by resolution and designated as the definitive rules of the City Council. That revision has been subsequently amended to continue adapting the rules to the needs of the Council and its committees. The proposed changes contained in the 2016 revision essentially impact three rules. With one notable exception, the majority of these attempt to modify procedures to enable a smooth transition aligned with the planned launch of a new legislative information management system, which staff anticipates early next year prior to a full public rollout of that system sometime before the end of the second quarter in 2017. The proposed changes are highlighted in red text in the copies that were previously distributed to your offices, a copy of which also was posted with the agenda for public access about this meeting. First, under Rule 3 pertaining to meetings of council, there is a strike in Section 3, adjourned meetings, shown on page 2. The second sentence is eliminated, which declares that an adjourned meeting will be considered a session of the original regular meeting. Robert's Rules, which is our adopted parliamentary authority, has made great efforts in its recent editions to draw better distinctions between meetings and sessions and the various limitations placed on how business may be conducted in each type of a scenario. So in short, there's no need for us to incorporate this sentence declaring that adjourned meetings are sessions of a regular meeting. It adds no value to our process as a city council, and in any event, we would default to the standard definitions that are set forth in Roberts. The majority of changes now focus on Section 8 of Rule 3, and that addresses the standard order of business for regular meetings of the full council. This begins on page 3. Here you can see that staff has proposed eliminating the references to joint committee meetings, referred committee reports, and matters originating in two committees simultaneously, which are shown under the order of reports of standing committees. The challenge for us is that the rules would require certain procedures for the new legislative information system, which it simply cannot accommodate. As you know, the clerk's office has been working this past year to develop a new system, which we anticipate deploying next year. That new system automates and streamlines much of the behind-the-scenes work to support the City Council and its committees. Due to the complexity of an almost unlimited number of workflows that would be involved in defining joint reports, multiple referrals, staff recommends that these provisions be eliminated. There are other simpler methods for accomplishing the same goals, and I'll speak to those in just a moment. We've also proposed a new order entitled Notice of Ordinance Introductions. This new order is necessary for us to automate the noticing of ordinances before the step of formally introducing and referring ordinances to standing committees. Currently, this procedure is done under the header of new business. However, in order for the new LIM system to distinguish between items of new business and the introduction or notice of an ordinance introduction, we need a new heading. So to support that unique workflow, which is associated only with ordinances, we're recommending that the standard order of business be amended to provide a separate section where such notices can be made and tracked automatically. This is similar to action that the council took recently in the past year to add a new header called Introduction and Referral Calendar, which was done in the last round of revisions to the rules. It allows us to track the actual formal introduction and referral separate from other business that's done. By adding this new order, we would be handling the notice of new ordinances and then the formal introduction and referral on the agenda in that order as they appear in the legislative process. This means that the only true new business on the council's agenda would relate to new business and not to the noticing and introduction of ordinances. Finally, at the top of page 4, you'll see that we've added a provision which indicates the council president shall determine the order of business for meetings other than regular meetings of the full city council. There currently is not a provision that describes what the order of business would be for a meeting of the full council that isn't a regular full meeting. So this would say that if the council were to conduct a regular meeting or a meeting of the full council that wasn't a regular meeting, where we would have reports of standing committees and then reports of special committees and then resolutions and then ordinances, that the council president would define that order. The next change you'll see on page 4 relates to the existing section 12, which we've proposed to strike and insert in lieu thereof 2 new sections, numbered 12 and 13. These new sections address public attendance and participation, as well as notice to and acknowledgement by the public of the fact that the council and committee meetings are recorded and broadcast. The new section 12 essentially builds on the prior provision about public attendance and expands on expectations of decorum. The rules note that meetings are to be conducted in a professional and courteous manner, which enables the orderly transaction of business. The first subsection, lettered A, sets forth standards and describes types of behavior that are not allowed. Subsection B outlines the process of how to address any disruption or disturbance that might interfere with or prevent the orderly conduct of business. And again, the new section 13 then provides notice to the public that these meetings are public and that they are subject to recording and broadcast. On page 8, you can see that we've deleted references to joint meetings of committees. Again, as I mentioned, this is because the new system is unable to accommodate the multiple variations that are possible in terms of meeting combinations, associated workflows, and reporting requirements. However, because the current rules specifically prevent a joint meeting from taking any action other than to refer its proposals to a standing committee, staff believes that the purpose served by a joint committee meeting is just as easily accomplished by a study session of 2 or more committees or potentially of all council members. The results of the study session would just the same be referred to the appropriate standing committee for its action for a recommendation to the full city council. And finally, under Rule 9 on page 11, staff has proposed to delete the final sentence currently shown in section 3, which relates to the number of readings required for ordinances. This provision is really a poorly drafted consolidation of 2 separate issues, and the drafting leads to some confusion about the intent and process. As currently written, the last sentence attempts to address 2 distinct situations. First, the introduction of an ordinance without prior notice, and second, the enactment of an ordinance under emergency conditions, which bypasses notice, introduction, referral, and review by committee. Accordingly, to be very clear on what these separate and distinct provisions are, we've proposed to incorporate 2 new sections, numbered 4 and 5. And this addresses the introduction of ordinances without prior notice, as well as the handling of emergency ordinances, respectively. As drafted, Section 4 provides the process that's currently in place today, whereby an ordinance may be introduced, given its first reading under the city charter, and referred to a standing committee having subject matter jurisdiction without prior notice.
Mr. Carl, if you'll hold briefly for a question from Councilmember Glidden. In addition to Councilmember Glidden, Councilmembers Bender, Palmisano, Goodman have also joined us.
Thank you. So I am trying to understand the purpose of Section 5. I would like some feedback on why this came up or why this is being introduced. It's hard for me to imagine what might be an ordinance as opposed to some other form of official action by the council, which could be a resolution, or how have we given, we already give many powers to our departments to take actions in an emergency. So I'm really hard pressed to understand what would be the circumstance that would allow an actual change of the laws of the city that would be required in an emergency.
Mr. Chair, to Council Vice President Glidden's inquiry, my answer is I don't have a specific example. This is already contained in the rules, but it's merged with other proceedings in terms of how the council can adopt ordinances. So the provision that allows for the adoption of an ordinance in a single meeting. The introduction, consideration, and adoption of an ordinance has been in the council rules. It's just merged under the procedure of notice of meetings. And when I was speaking with Peter Ginder, former deputy city attorney, about this, there was some concern that it should be pulled out separately and described as how, if the council had a need for whatever purpose, to quickly move the adoption of an ordinance in a single meeting, the introduction and action on an ordinance, then it would be provided, and it would say that without prior notice, the council could do this by the unanimous vote of its entire membership.
So could you please point me to where within the rules there's the strikeout language that implies this? So I certainly see where we already have had for a long time the procedure that we can, with unanimous consent, kind of more quickly move forward the introduction of an ordinance, which then allows for however quickly we can within our rules set a public hearing if needed. I think we don't even require a public hearing. That is really just a common thing that we do, a common practice that we do. So I feel like we have a lot of options to us, some of which are beyond the notice requirements that are already, I think we're bound by legal requirements to give certain notices of things that we do. So can you point me to that language where the emergency action option was already residing in our rules?
Mr. Chair, in the existing Section 3 under Rule 9, shown on page 11, in the strikeout language, the second sentence says, notwithstanding this general requirement for 2 separate readings, which is contained in the city charter, an ordinance may, by unanimous consent of all council members present, be introduced without previous notice. It goes on to say, and passed by a unanimous vote of the city council at the same meeting. And my understanding of this rule, as it has been used in the past, is it's really trying to accomplish 2 purposes in one sentence. So again, poorly drafted, that we could bypass the 2-step process, which says in one council meeting we give notice. In the second council meeting, we do the formal reading, introduction, and referral. We do that now when we say, let's, by unanimous consent of all the members present at the meeting, bypass notice and go straight to introduction and referral. That piece is the first part, but the comma, and passed by unanimous vote of the city council at the same meeting. So it's introducing, bypassing notice, and taking final formal action at the same meeting. And that's the piece that we were trying to pull out separately and say, in an emergency condition where we would have to explain what the emergency was on the record, the council could, if there was ever a need, bypass notice and introduction, 2 separate steps, and go straight to enactment.
Okay, I'm going to just kind of so I've got a few more questions. So we probably maybe just kind of a little bit more direct response. I wanted to understand, without these rules, could we do that already? Again, knowing that a lot of the notice requirements have to do with public hearings. My understanding is we are not required to host a public hearing, and that again is more of a regular practice that we employ in virtually all circumstances. I'm just trying to understand how this kind of works with what we're already allowed to do.
Mr. Chair, I think the direct answer is that the charter, our highest level governing authority, requires 2 readings. Absent a rule that says we can bypass that, we would require 2 meetings all the time. You would have to give notice, and you would have to at least have a notice and introduction in one meeting and action in the next. We actually, our practice is about 3 meetings, not 2. We give notice, which is not considered a reading under the charter. At the next meeting, we do call it the first reading, introduction, and referral. And that's the charter requirement for a separate reading of the ordinance. When it comes back from the committee with a recommendation to council, that's considered its second reading. So those 2 readings are done when the formal introduction, first reading, and referral are made, and when the recommendation of council comes back to council and council takes action.
So then just kind of following this through, since we already have the opportunity to set separate special meetings, theoretically, with the mayor's support, we could set a meeting the next day, and that would be our second reading.
A requirement for notice would require 72 hours publication first.
Okay.
So there would be
then
time
4
delays.
days.
Yeah.
4 days.
Yeah. And so this provision was simply to say, if there was ever a need for the city council, I don't know that there's an example of that, but it was hidden as a clause within the previous rule. We pulled it out.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Carl.
So continuing from there, we've redrafted Section 3 as it exists to include now Section 4 and 5, as I've explained. The remaining sections under that rule then have been renumbered accordingly. And that completes my summary of the proposed rules revision for 2016. In your packets, a resolution has been included which was drafted to adopt the 2016 revision designated as the new rules of order. Staff requests the committee approve the revision and recommend passage of that resolution by the full council, and that the clerk be directed to publish the revised rules for access by policymakers, staff, and the public. And I'm happy to stand for any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. I know that there's been a lot of work and administrative clerical changes that have been made to these rules. We really do appreciate it. Do we have any questions for Mr. Carl at the moment? There's a lot of information in there, so I'm just going to pause for about 20 seconds or so, just so folks have a chance to look through in case they have any additional questions. Seeing none, Mr. Carl, thank you for your work.
Thank
and
you.
I will move approval of this item. Any discussion on the motion? All those in approval, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. And that item passes. As that is our only item on the agenda for today, we are adjourned. Thank you.